It was a quiet morning when the boy left home with a smile on his face and a book tucked under his arm. He loved spending time in the library more than anywhere else. While other kids his age ran around the park or played video games, he could sit for hours among the rows of shelves, flipping through stories that carried him into other worlds. To him, the library wasn't just a building filled with books. It was a safe place, a second home where he felt comforted by the smell of old paper and the silence that wrapped around every corner. That morning felt like any other. He told his mother he would be back by evening, just like always. His father, who was heading out for work, waved at him from the gate. There was nothing unusual, nothing that made anyone pause. The boy walked down the street with his backpack humming to himself. Neighbors saw him. A shopkeeper near the library remembered him buying a small snack on the way. Everyone agreed later. He looked happy, calm, and just like the child they knew. The library was located in the middle of the town. A large old building, it had been standing there for decades with wide wooden doors and tall windows that let in soft streams of light. Many people came and went every day. Students, office workers, elderly folks looking for a quiet corner. And on that day too, the place was busy. Yet nobody paid much attention when the boy stepped inside. He walked in, nodding politely at the librarian, and disappeared into the rows of shelves. That was the last clear sight anyone had of him. Hours passed. At home, his family thought he was lost in a book as usual. Evening came and the chair at the dinner table remained empty. His mother grew worried first, pacing near the window, waiting to hear his footsteps on the street. When the sun went down and the boy still hadn't returned, fear crept in. His father drove to the library, certain he'd find him sitting in a corner with a book open. But when he asked the staff, confusion filled the room. They remembered him coming in but not leaving. The librarian checked the log, but the boy hadn't checked out any books that day. The search began in a rush. His parents walked up and down the aisles calling his name. Library staff joined in, checking every reading desk, every restroom, even the storage rooms where old boxes of books were kept. But he wasn't there. It felt impossible. How could a boy walk in and simply vanish inside a building where dozens of people were around? By nightfall, police were called. Officers arrived quickly, cordoning off the library. Flashlights swept across the shelves and corridors as officers searched every inch of the place. They checked closets, crawl spaces, even the locked basement where old records were stored. Nothing. The boy was nowhere to be found. The first night was filled with panic. His family stood outside the library, watching helplessly as police cars lined the street and curious onlookers gathered. Everyone in the neighborhood whispered about what could have happened, but no one had an answer. Detectives were assigned to the case the next morning. They began with the surveillance cameras. The footage was chilling in its simplicity. The boy was clearly seen walking into the library at 10:13 a.m. He wore his backpack, pushed the heavy door open, and walked straight toward the main hall. After that, nothing. Hours of footage were reviewed. Every exit carefully watched. People left with books in their arms. Students walked out laughing. Elderly readers stepped into the sunlight one after another. But the boy never came out. It was as if he had been swallowed by the building. Detectives questioned everyone who had been there that day. Some remembered seeing him between the shelves, bent over a thick book. A student said he thought he saw the boy near the staircase at one point, but he wasn't sure. The librarian insisted she hadn't noticed anything unusual. But the stories didn't line up. People's memories blurred. Some said they had seen him in the children's section. Others swore he had wandered toward the basement door. The contradictions made the case even harder. News of the disappearance spread quickly across town. Parents held their children closer, telling them not to go out alone. People gathered outside the library whispering theories. Some believed the boy had run away. Others thought he had been taken right under everyone's noses. The building itself became a source of unease. Its long hallways and shadowy corners suddenly felt sinister. And yet, the truth was still hidden somewhere within those walls. Detectives returned again and again to the library. They looked for hidden exits or forgotten doors. The building was old, with strange layouts and narrow staircases that led to basements few had entered. One detective noticed a door near the archives that seemed unusually reinforced, as if it had been locked for years. But when they tried to open it, they found nothing more than piles of dusty books and broken furniture. Still, something didn't sit right. As days turned into weeks, the family's hope began to dim. They put up posters, pleaded with the community, and sat through endless interviews. The mother barely slept, waiting for a phone call that never came. The father grew restless, searching on his own when detectives left for the night. For them, time was frozen in the moment their boy had stepped through the library doors and never returned. But for investigators, this was only the beginning. They knew the case wasn't just about a missing child. It was about how a place meant to be safe and welcoming had become the scene of something unexplainable. And as they stood in the echoing silence of the library's halls, they couldn't shake the feeling that the building itself was keeping a secret. Detectives started their second day at the library with tired eyes and heavy hearts. The case had already attracted attention across the town, and pressure was building fast. Everyone wanted answers, but the truth remained hidden in the silence of the shelves. The lead investigator sat at a wooden table inside the library, stacks of reports in front of him, while officers combed through hours of security footage again. The strange part was that the cameras worked perfectly, yet the boy simply disappeared on screen. There was no moment where he left through the main doors or even slipped past anyone unnoticed. It was as though he had vanished in plain sight. The family sat outside in the parking lot waiting for news. The mother's eyes were red from crying. Her hands clutched tightly around a small notebook the boy had used to jot down favorite quotes. The father kept pacing back and forth, trying to stay strong, though his frustration was clear. Every officer who stepped out of the library to make a call or grab something from the car was met with their hopeful stares. They wanted even the smallest piece of information, but none came. Detectives began interviewing staff members again. The head librarian repeated her story. She saw the boy walk in and smile at her before heading toward the reading area, but after that she couldn't recall anything else. Another staff member said he might have noticed the boy near the staircase that led down to the archives, though he wasn't certain. A few regular visitors were also questioned. An elderly man swore he saw the boy sitting near the window in the children's section at one point, but when he looked again a little while later, the chair was empty. A college student said she thought she saw him browsing a shelf of history books, but she wasn't sure if it was the same child. The contradictions made things even more confusing. The investigators knew memory was tricky. People often misremembered events, especially under stress, but every small detail mattered in a case like this. So they carefully wrote down each account, hoping a pattern would emerge. The library itself became the focus of their attention. Built decades ago, it had narrow staircases, winding hallways, and storage rooms filled with old furniture and dusty boxes. Officers searched again and again, opening cupboards, pulling out drawers, even knocking on walls to check for hollow sounds. One officer noticed a strange draft coming from behind a row of shelves, but when they moved the books, it turned out to be nothing more than a cracked window. Each time they thought they were onto something, it led nowhere. Still, detectives couldn't shake the feeling that the building was hiding something. They pulled out the old blueprints of the library, studying every detail. There were notes about renovations over the years, new walls added, old rooms sealed. The basement was especially suspicious. It had been closed to the public long ago, used only by staff to store outdated records. Several doors were locked, and some staff admitted they hadn't been down there in years. That raised questions. Could the boy have wandered there? Could someone have let him in? One afternoon, detectives gathered a team and descended into the basement with flashlights. The air was damp and heavy, the smell of dust filling their lungs. They walked through narrow passages lined with boxes of old books. At the far end, they came across a thick door with a rusty lock. It took effort to break it open, and when they stepped inside, they found themselves in a forgotten storage area. The room was cluttered with broken chairs, faded posters, and stacks of newspapers. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, but as one officer scanned the floor with his light, he noticed something odd, a crumpled candy wrapper lying near the corner. It was recent, far too fresh to have been sitting there for years. And everyone remembered that the boy had bought a snack on his way to the library. The discovery made everyone pause. Could it be his? Or was it just a coincidence? They collected the wrapper carefully, bagged it for evidence, and searched the room more thoroughly. On one wall, they noticed faint markings, almost like someone had drawn with chalk or pencil. Small figures, childish in nature, barely visible through the dust. It was unsettling, though no one could confirm if they had been made by the boy. Meanwhile, the family grew restless with the lack of progress. They organized search parties, walking through nearby streets, parks, and even abandoned buildings in the neighborhood. Volunteers joined in, handing out flyers with the boy's picture, asking shopkeepers if they had seen him. Every phone call made their hearts race, only to end in disappointment when it wasn't the news they hoped for. At night, the parents sat together, clinging to the belief that their son was still alive somewhere, waiting to be found. Detectives also expanded their investigation beyond the library. They reviewed traffic camera footage from nearby streets, hoping to spot anything unusual. They checked the backgrounds of all library employees, looking for past criminal records or suspicious behavior. One name caught their attention, an ex-janitor who had worked there years ago. He had been fired after repeated complaints and had since disappeared from town. It was a thin lead, but worth noting. As days turned into weeks, the pressure on detectives mounted. Reporters gathered outside the library, broadcasting live updates. The townspeople grew impatient, demanding answers. The idea that a child could simply vanish inside a public building unsettled everyone. Parents grew fearful of letting their children out of sight, and whispers spread about hidden rooms, dark secrets, and unsolved mysteries buried within the library walls. Detectives kept returning to the same question. If the boy never left the library, then where was he? They replayed the footage over and over, slowing it down, zooming in on every frame. At one point, an officer noticed something unusual. In the corner of the screen near the back of the hall, a shadow seemed to flicker briefly. It wasn't clear, just a blur, but it hinted that maybe someone else had been there, out of sight. That tiny detail pushed them to dig deeper. The basement became their main focus once again. They brought in experts to scan the walls, checking for hidden spaces. The results showed irregularities in certain areas, suggesting that there might be sealed-off sections behind the existing walls. This discovery brought a mix of fear and hope. If those hidden spaces existed, what would they find inside? Could the boy still be there? For the family, every update was torture. They were caught between hope and despair, clinging to the possibility that their child was alive, yet terrified of what the search might reveal. The mother often sat outside the library, refusing to leave, convinced that her son was still inside somewhere. Strangers came to comfort her, bringing food, offering prayers, but nothing could ease her pain. The detectives knew they had to move quickly. Each passing day made the case harder, but they were determined not to give up. They had uncovered enough strange details, the candy wrapper, the markings on the wall, the suspicious basement blueprints, that they felt certain they were closing in on something. The library was no longer just a place of books and silence. It had become the center of a chilling mystery, one that everyone in town was desperate to see solved. And as the days dragged on, the tension only grew. Somewhere in the shadows of that old building lay the answer, and the detectives were getting closer to uncovering it. The search inside the library had already stretched far longer than anyone expected, but detectives refused to stop. Something about the building gnawed at them. It felt as though the walls were holding back a secret. The candy wrapper they had found earlier gave them hope that they were not chasing shadows. And then there were those strange markings on the wall, almost like drawings left by a child. Small details, yes, but in a case where nothing else made sense, they mattered. One evening, long after the library had closed, detectives returned with a small team and stronger equipment. They wanted to go deeper than before, to look in places that hadn't been touched in years. The basement was their focus again. The atmosphere there was heavy, the air cool and damp, filled with dust that clung to their clothes. They moved shelves aside, tapped on walls, and inspected every corner with flashlights. As one of the officers ran his hand along a far wall, he noticed something unusual. The plaster looked different from the rest, newer, as if it had been patched over more recently. He tapped, and the sound echoed hollow. Everyone grew still. It was the kind of moment where silence pressed in when every heartbeat felt loud. They called in tools and carefully broke away part of the wall. What they uncovered behind it made everyone freeze. A small opening appeared, just big enough for a person to crawl through. The passage behind it was dark, the kind of darkness that seemed endless. Slowly, with lights shining ahead, they stepped inside. The passage led to a narrow hidden room. At first glance, it looked abandoned, but as the beams of light moved across the space, objects began to appear. There were blankets spread out on the floor, a stack of old food wrappers, and scattered papers with scribbles that looked like they had been drawn by a child. Everyone fell silent. The blankets weren't covered in heavy dust. The wrappers were not old. The air smelled stale, but not untouched. This room had been used recently. The chilling thought spread among them. Had the boy been kept here? The detectives carefully gathered everything they found. Some papers had stick figure drawings on them. Some had small words scrawled across the surface. It was impossible to know for sure if the boy had made them, but they looked like something a child would create. One of the drawings showed a tall figure standing next to a small one. That image stuck with everyone in the room. The discovery shook the town. When the family was told, their emotions poured out at once. Relief that maybe their son had been there. Dread about what it meant. It was proof they were not imagining things. He had been inside the library, hidden away where no one could see. But it also meant someone had put him there, someone who knew the building well enough to create a hidden space, someone who had gone unnoticed for a long time. Detectives turned their focus to possible suspects. They rechecked the list of current and former employees. Their eyes fell again on the name of the former janitor who had worked at the library years ago. He had left under tense circumstances after being fired for misconduct. His record showed small run-ins with the law, nothing too severe. But he had a reputation for being odd, keeping to himself, and spending long hours in the basement. When officers tried to track him down, they found he had moved away from town shortly after being dismissed. No one knew exactly where. That raised a red flag. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined the hidden room carefully. They dusted for fingerprints, tested the food wrappers, and studied the drawings. To their surprise, partial fingerprints were recovered that didn't match the boy or any of the library staff. That confirmed it. Another person had been there. Detectives began piecing together a timeline. The boy entered the library and at some point disappeared from the main hall. The hidden room showed signs of use. Someone had been hiding there, waiting, perhaps even watching. The thought chilled the investigators. How could anyone have been inside without others noticing? And how many times before had people walked past that wall, completely unaware of what was behind it? The family struggled to process the news. The mother sat in her living room clutching her son's photograph, whispering prayers that he was alive. The father, though broken inside, tried to stay strong, pushing detectives for updates every day. Their home, once filled with laughter, now felt like a place where time stood still. Every knock at the door brought a surge of hope, followed by disappointment when it wasn't their boy. Detectives kept digging. They went back to Old Town records looking for information about the library's construction and anyone connected to it. They discovered that during renovations years earlier, some rooms in the basement had been sealed off rather than cleared. That gave someone with knowledge of the building the perfect chance to create hiding spots. Their suspicions grew stronger around the missing janitor. They learned that before he was fired, he had lived in a small apartment not far from the library. Former neighbors described him as quiet, but they recalled seeing him carrying heavy boxes late at night. Some even remembered him coming and going from the library after hours, as though he still had access. Those memories were vague, but they fit the picture investigators were building. Detectives expanded their search beyond town. They checked addresses, old records, and possible relatives. Finally, a small lead emerged. A cabin registered under his name in a remote area miles away. It wasn't much, but it was enough to act on. Plans were made quietly. They didn't want word to spread and tip him off. While preparations were underway, the family was told gently that investigators were closing in on someone. They were warned not to get their hopes too high, but the possibility brought a flicker of light back into their eyes. They clung to that fragile hope as the days dragged on. Inside the library, things grew tense. Workers felt uneasy coming in, knowing the place had hidden secrets. Visitors came in fewer numbers, and the building that was once a hub of learning now carried an unsettling silence. The shelves stood tall, the books untouched, but everyone who walked through the doors thought about the boy and what had happened in those walls. Detectives, however, couldn't let fear slow them down. They had evidence, they had a suspect, and now they had a destination. They were determined to find the truth no matter how long it took. And as they prepared for what came next, one thought stayed with them. The boy's trail hadn't ended. It was leading them forward, step by step, toward an answer they had been chasing since the day he vanished from the library. The discovery of the hidden room had given detectives their first real breakthrough. For weeks they had been chasing shadows, but now they had evidence that someone had been living inside the library. The food wrappers, the blankets, the drawings on the wall, and most importantly, the fingerprints. All of it pointed to another person's presence. Every piece led back to one name, the former janitor who had once worked in the same building and then suddenly disappeared. Detectives followed the trail with care. They didn't want to rush and risk scaring him away. The man's background was troubling enough. He had been described as someone who spent too much time alone in the basement of the library, often working late hours even when he wasn't needed. Some colleagues had called him strange, though no one could have guessed how far things might go. His sudden departure years earlier had gone mostly unnoticed, but now it stood out like a missing piece in a puzzle. The cabin registered under his name became the focus of their investigation. It was located deep in the countryside, far from the main road, surrounded by thick trees. Detectives planned a careful operation. They wanted to check the place quietly first, making sure not to alert him. One evening, a small team drove out and parked at a distance. They approached on foot, their flashlights off, relying on the pale moonlight to guide them. From a distance, the cabin looked quiet, but there were faint signs of life. Smoke rose slowly from a chimney and a dim light flickered through a window. That was enough to confirm that someone was inside. The officers exchanged tense glances. Could the boy be there? The possibility sent a wave of both hope and fear through them. Back in town, the family waited with restless hearts. They hadn't been told details, only that detectives were following a strong lead. The mother couldn't sleep that night. She sat by the window, staring at the street, holding a photo of her son close to her chest. The father paced the living room, glancing at his phone every few minutes, waiting for it to ring. Every sound outside made them jump. Every passing car raised their hopes, but the hours dragged on in silence. At the cabin, detectives moved in carefully. They surrounded the place, their footsteps soft against the ground. One officer peered through a gap in the curtain and froze. He whispered to the others that he had seen movement inside. A figure, thin and small, had crossed the room. That was enough. They decided not to wait any longer. With a signal from the lead officer, they knocked sharply on the door, announcing themselves. For a long moment there was no answer. Then the sound of shuffling footsteps came from inside. The door opened slightly and there he was, the former janitor. His appearance was disheveled, his eyes wide and uneasy as he stared at the officers. At first he tried to close the door, but they pushed it open and stepped in. The cabin was dimly lit, cluttered with old furniture and piles of newspapers. But what drew everyone's attention was the locked door at the back of the room. The janitor stood frozen, his hands trembling as detectives moved toward it. They demanded the key. At first he shook his head, muttering that there was nothing there. But the officers didn't waste time. They forced the door open. Behind it was a small room, and there, sitting on the floor, was the boy. His eyes widened at the sudden burst of light and voices. For a second he didn't move, as if unsure whether it was real. Then slowly he stood up. He was frightened but alive. The sight brought a rush of relief so powerful that even the hardened detectives felt tears sting their eyes. They called out gently, assuring him he was safe now. The boy took a hesitant step forward, then another, until he was in their arms. The janitor was restrained quickly, taken into custody without further struggle. The call went out immediately. Back in town, the family's phone rang in the middle of the night. The father answered, and for a moment he couldn't breathe as he listened to the words on the other end. His knees gave way and he sank into a chair. The mother rushed to his side, her heart racing. When he finally found his voice, he whispered to her, "They found him." What followed was a blur of tears and joy. They drove out to meet their son, their emotions overwhelming them. When they finally saw him, standing there wrapped in a blanket given by officers, they ran to him. The mother pulled him into her arms, sobbing with relief. The father held them both, unable to let go. The boy clung tightly, as if afraid they might vanish if he loosened his grip. It was a moment of pure human emotion, one that no words could fully capture. The town woke up to the news the next morning. Headlines spread quickly and people gathered outside the library, sharing the relief. The boy had been found alive. The fear that had weighed on everyone for so long began to lift. Strangers who had never met the family felt joy as though he were their own. Parents hugged their children tighter. thankful that the nightmare had ended with hope instead of tragedy. Detectives continued their work, piecing together the details of what had happened. They discovered that the janitor had been using the hidden room in the library for years, slipping in and out unnoticed. He knew the building better than anyone, and that knowledge had allowed him to stay hidden. When the boy entered the library that day, he was lured into the basement and kept in the concealed room for a short time before being moved to the cabin. The thought of how close the boy had been to discovery during the first searches was chilling. The library itself underwent changes. Security was tightened, cameras were updated, and the basement was sealed properly to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. The hidden spaces were cleared and the building was renovated to restore trust. Staff who had once walked through those halls with unease began to feel safe again, though the memory of what had happened would never fully fade. For the family, life slowly returned to a new rhythm. Their home, once filled with silence, now echoed again with the sound of their son's laughter. The boy took time to recover, to feel safe again, but surrounded by love and care, he began to heal. His parents watched him with gratitude every day, never taking a single moment for granted. Detectives were praised for their persistence, for refusing to give up even when the trail seemed cold. The town honored them, grateful that their determination had brought the boy back home. But for the officers themselves, it wasn't about recognition. It was about that single moment when they opened the door of the cabin and saw a frightened child standing there. That was the moment that mattered, the moment that would stay with them forever. The case became a story people told for years, not just about a disappearance, but about the strength of a community, the resilience of a family, and the tireless work of those who never stopped searching. It was a reminder that even in the darkest situations, hope could survive. And in this case, hope had carried everyone through until the boy was finally found safe in the arms of those who loved him most. When the boy was finally home again, the house felt alive in a way it hadn't for months. For so long, the walls had carried silence, only broken by the sound of his mother's quiet tears or his father's pacing footsteps. But now there was laughter again, soft at first, almost hesitant, as though everyone was still afraid it might vanish if they embraced it too fully. The boy sat at the kitchen table, a warm meal in front of him, his parents never leaving his side. They kept glancing at him, reaching out to touch his shoulder, brushing his hair back, as if they needed to reassure themselves that he was really there, safe, breathing, smiling faintly. Neighbors came by with food, flowers, and gifts. Some simply stood at the doorway with tears in their eyes, telling the family how thankful they were. Many admitted they had prayed every night for the boy's safety. Strangers wrote letters, children drew pictures, and the town wrapped the family in a blanket of love and relief. For months, everyone had carried the weight of fear together, and now they shared in the joy of his return. But recovery was not simple. The boy had been through something no child should ever face. He was quiet, often staring into space as if lost in thoughts he couldn't explain. At night, he sometimes woke up suddenly, breathing fast, needing the comfort of his parents nearby. They never once complained. They stayed close, holding him, telling him over and over that he was safe, that he was home, that nothing would ever take him away again. Detectives visited the family often in the weeks after. They explained the details carefully, answering questions as gently as possible. The boy listened sometimes, other times he covered his ears, not wanting to hear. His parents thanked the officers again and again, struggling to find words strong enough to express their gratitude. For them, the detectives weren't just investigators. They were the people who had given them their child back. The town, too, changed in small ways. Parents became more watchful, keeping a closer eye on their children. The library, once a place of trust, had to earn that trust back. Workers spent months repairing, renovating, and improving it. The hidden rooms were removed, the basement sealed, and new cameras and alarms were installed. The building reopened eventually, but it never felt quite the same. For some, it was still a place of comfort. For others, it carried memories of fear. The boy's story reached far beyond the town. News channels reported on it. Papers printed headlines about the mysterious disappearance and the miraculous rescue. But to the family, the most important part was not the attention. It was the simple fact that their son was home. They shielded him from too much outside noise, choosing instead to surround him with normal days. Breakfast together, walks in the park, quiet evenings where they read books together just like before. They wanted life to feel safe and ordinary again, piece by piece. The boy himself began to heal slowly. He returned to school after some time, welcomed back by classmates who had missed him dearly. Teachers treated him gently, giving him space when he needed it, encouraging him when he felt unsure. He found comfort in familiar routines, reading his favorite stories, sketching in his notebook, sitting quietly by the window as sunlight poured in. There was a strength in him, quiet but unshakable, that everyone noticed. For his parents, every moment was a reminder of how fragile life could be, and how precious. They no longer rushed through their days. They cherished the little things, the way he laughed when the dog wagged its tail, the way he asked for one more bedtime story, the way he leaned against them when he was tired. These were the things they held on to, treasures that mattered more than anything else in the world. Detectives eventually closed the case, but they never forgot it. For many of them, it was one of the most difficult investigations of their careers and also one of the most meaningful. They had walked into the unknown, followed faint traces, and refused to stop even when everything seemed impossible. And at the end, they had opened a locked door and seen the face of a child whose life had been saved because they didn't give up. That memory stayed with them, a constant reminder of why they did the work they did. The town honored them, holding a small gathering where the community came together to thank the officers. There were speeches, but the most powerful moment came when the boy, shy and quiet, stood with his parents and simply smiled at the crowd. It was proof that light could return after darkness, that hope could win over despair. As months passed, the boy's story slowly faded from headlines, but not from the hearts of those who had lived through it. People still spoke of it in whispers at times, especially when they passed the library. They remembered how quickly life could change, how a single day had turned the whole town upside down. And they remembered, too, how persistence, love, and faith had brought a child back home. For the boy, the future stretched ahead like an open road. He still loved books, though for a time stepping back into the library was too difficult. Instead, his parents brought him new ones to read at home, filling shelves with stories of adventure and hope. Slowly, as trust rebuilt itself, he found his way back to the places he loved. With each step, he grew stronger, surrounded by people who would never let him feel alone again. The family often looked back, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. They knew they had faced something unimaginable, but they had also witnessed the power of community and the resilience of the human spirit. The mother, in particular, carried a quiet strength. She said that every day she looked at her son and saw not just what they had almost lost, but also the miracle of what they had regained. The father, too, found new perspective. He worked fewer hours, spent more time at home, and never missed a chance to sit with his son, to listen to him, to laugh with him. Their story became more than just a tale of disappearance and rescue. It became a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope is never truly gone. It may flicker, it may weaken, but if held onto tightly enough, it can carry people through until the light returns. That was the lesson the family carried with them, and the one the town remembered every time they spoke of the boy who had vanished into a library and come back. In the end, life moved forward. The seasons changed. The boy grew taller, and the scars of those frightening months slowly faded. But in quiet moments, when his mother tucked him in at night, when his father walked him to school, when the boy himself sat with a book in his lap, there was always a deep, unspoken gratitude. Gratitude for the officers who searched without rest, for the neighbors who cared, for the strangers who prayed, and for the simple gift of being together again. And so the story closed not with darkness, but with light. A boy who had disappeared was found. A family that had been broken by fear was healed by love. A town that had once whispered in worry now spoke in relief. And somewhere between the pages of a book and the warmth of home, life began again, stronger than before.